There are all kinds of people in this world, some good and some bad. Some are born with silver spoons, while others have to fight for their daily bread. But this story is about an eccentric man who stared at the moon, and that, too, for 374 nights in a row. You must be wondering what was so special about the moon, that this man risked his life and lost his eyesight just to have a glimpse of it. Let's find out in today's story. Our story begins in 1862 when an amateur astronomer named John Henry Pepper was born. He grew up in England in a small village surrounded by hills and meadows. His father was a cobbler, but John had no interest in his father's trade. From a very young age, he was fascinated by the night sky and the celestial bodies that twinkled above him. He would lie on his back and stare at the stars and the moon for hours. He knew every constellation in the sky and could predict eclipses and meteor showers with uncanny accuracy. But there was one thing that puzzled him: the craters on the moon. John had heard stories from his grandfather about a time when the moon was smooth and blemish-free, but now it was covered in craters and no one could explain why. This mystery consumed John, and he became obsessed with solving it. He spent all his free time reading books on astronomy and collecting old telescopes. He also started attending lectures at the local university and soon became a regular at the observatory. But John's obsession with the moon did not go unnoticed. The other astronomers thought he was mad. They told him that the moon's surface was well studied and that there were no more mysteries to solve. But John was not convinced. He believed that he was meant to discover something extraordinary and that the secret of the moon's craters lay hidden in plain sight. Then one day, John had a breakthrough. He realized that the only way to solve the mystery was to stare at the moon for as long as possible and record every detail. He knew that no one would believe him if he just told them what he saw, so he decided to prove them wrong. He built a telescope in his backyard and installed a clockwork mechanism that would track the moon's movement across the sky. Then he settled into his chair and began staring at the moon. At first, everything seemed normal. The moon looked like a giant white disk with dark patches scattered across its surface. But then something strange happened. John noticed that the patches were actually craters, and they weren't just holes. They were gateways to another world. He could see strange creatures moving around in them, and they seemed to be watching him. John was both excited and terrified. He had never seen anything like this before, and he didn't know what to do. But he knew that he couldn't stop now. He had come too far to turn back, so he continued staring at the moon, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, John's obsession grew stronger. He became thinner and weaker, but he didn't care. He was too busy watching the moon and recording his observations. He drew pictures of the creatures he saw and wrote down their names and habits. He also discovered that the moon had a strange effect on him. It made him feel euphoric and energized, but also depressed and lonely. He felt like he was going crazy, but he was too far into his experiment to stop now. Then one day, John's neighbor noticed that he hadn't left his house in weeks. She was worried about him, so she called the police and they broke into his house to check on him. They found John sitting in his chair, staring at the moon. He was so absorbed in what he was seeing that he didn't even notice them. The police were shocked by what they saw. They had never seen anyone stare at the moon for so long without going blind. They tried to pull John away from the telescope, but he resisted them and screamed at them to leave him alone. The police were confused and scared. They didn't know what to do with John. They called for backup, and soon a crowd of people gathered outside John's house. They were all staring at the moon and whispering about John's madness, but John didn't care about them. He was too busy watching the moon and recording his observations. As the crowd grew larger and louder, John's obsession grew stronger. He became more delusional and erratic, sometimes laughing hysterically and sometimes crying uncontrollably. He also started hallucinating and seeing things that weren't there. He claimed that the moon was sending him messages and that he was being watched by aliens, but no one believed him. Then one night, John had a vision. He saw a bright light coming from the moon, and he believed that it was a sign that he was about to make a great discovery. He rushed to his telescope and started observing the moon. And that's when it happened. The light from the moon turned into a beam and shot straight towards him. John was blinded. He screamed in pain and fell to the ground, but no one could help him. The crowd was too busy staring at the moon and taking pictures. When they finally realized what had happened, it was too late. John was blind and his eyes were burned forever. They rushed him to the hospital, but the doctors could not restore his eyesight. John was left in darkness forever. But despite his blindness, John continued to observe the moon. He used his other senses to feel the moon's presence, and he claimed that he could still see it in his mind's eye. He said that the moon was beautiful and mysterious and that it held secrets that humans were not meant to know. He also said that he was not crazy, but a visionary, and that one day his story would be understood. But no one listened to him. They thought he was still delusional and suffering from a mental breakdown. John died a few years later, still believing that he was chosen by the moon. He was buried in a cemetery, and his grave is marked with a simple headstone that reads, "Here lies John Henry Piper, the man who stared at the moon." Now, after hearing his story, you might think that John was a fool who wasted his life on a pointless obsession, and you might also think that the moon is just a lifeless rock that has no power over humans. But here's the thing. We don't really know what the moon is made of or what powers it might have. We can only observe its surface and speculate about its interior. What if John was onto something that the scientists of his time couldn't understand? What if the moon is not just a rock, but a living being with its own intelligence and agency? What if John saw the truth, while everyone else was blinded by their own ignorance? Of course, these are just possibilities and not facts. But isn't that what makes science so exciting? The fact that there is always something new to discover and understand. Who knows? Maybe one day we will have the technology and wisdom to decipher the messages from the moon and unlock the secrets of the universe. Or maybe we will continue to be like John, staring at the moon and wondering what lies beyond the craters and the silence. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it with your friends. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.